J'ouvre la séance.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to Standing Order 81.4, the committee is resuming consideration of the main estimates for 2026-2027. Vote 1 under Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, vote 1 under Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, vote 1 under the Office of the Senate Ethics Officer, votes 1 and 5 under Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, referred to the committee on Thursday, February 26, 2026. I would like to welcome the Lobbying Commissioner to today's meeting. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Bélanger, and during the second hour, we will have another guest here. I imagine that you are ready, Ms. Bélanger, for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Hello, Madam Chair and committee members. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss the main estimates and my office's plans for fiscal year 2026-2027. As many of you know, the Lobbying Act requires that my office maintain the registry of lobbyists. My team works to consistently improve the registry so that both filing and finding information is as easy and efficient as possible. The registry is the transparency tool that allows Canadians to know who is lobbying federal public office holders and about what. We provide educational sessions and develop various information products to help people better understand the requirements of both the Federal Lobbying Act and the Lobbyist Code of Conduct. We also do compliance work to support respect of the Act and the Code. The objective of the Federal Lobbying Framework is to ensure that lobbying is both transparent and ethical. This is a cornerstone of a healthy democracy that supports citizen trust in public institutions.
Mon budget total pour l'exercice en cours.
My total budget for this fiscal year is approximately $6.1 million. Roughly $4.8 million goes to the salaries and benefits, leaving an operating budget of about $1.3 million. About $700,000 of that operating budget is spent on obtaining services from other federal organizations, including services related to human resources, finances, procurement, and information technology. This is a very modest budget, and not surprisingly, we were not subject to the comprehensive expenditure review. However, I am always very mindful of our stewardship of resources. Ever-rising costs, including expenses for IT, licenses, and infrastructure needed to run our office, is increasingly putting pressure on our budget and limits our flexibility in the allocation of funds. Related to the budget, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to highlight the challenges posed by the current funding model for agents of Parliament. Requiring us to seek funding through a ministerial portfolio undermines our independence. I would urge this committee to consider a new funding model that recognizes and reinforces the independence of agents of Parliament.
This year. Given your current study of the Lobbying Act, you are well aware of one of our current priorities. It is a great pleasure to support you in identifying legislative improvements that can keep Canada at the forefront in lobbying transparency for years to come. I will say the following in relation to my recommendations. They recognize that the amount of effort required to electronically file and maintain information in the Registry of Lobbyists is not onerous. Adopting clear, consistent, and easy-to-follow registration and disclosure requirements would reduce the amount of time and effort that stakeholders must invest into understanding the current intricacies of the Act. Not only would this help stakeholders, it would also reduce the extensive resources currently used by my office to provide clarifications and explanations. These resources could in turn be allocated to other priorities, including providing even greater support to a growing number of stakeholders. As for other priorities, We continue to develop ways to expand awareness and understanding of the Act and the Code. In particular, we are updating on our online materials, including advisory opinions, always with the goal of simplifying the guidance we provide and increasing clarity for stakeholders. In addition, we're advancing on 19 ongoing compliance files. As you are aware, the Act imposes strict confidentiality requirements, and I therefore cannot discuss the specifics of any particular compliance matter. However, I can say that currently 3 files are with the RCMP. All of this work is accomplished through the contributions of, on average, 35 employees. I am always extremely proud of my team and the work that we do. According to a study based on the most recent Public Service Employment Survey, our office, and I'm very proud of this, was the top-ranked federal organization. For example, we had leading scores in management and being a great place to work. This reflects the team's collective sense of shared purpose, collaboration, and integrity. Words cannot express how grateful I am for my team's unwavering dedication to lobbying transparency, ethics, and compliance. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I am pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Commissaire. Vous avez été direct sur le...
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. You took 5 minutes on the dot. Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. How do you assess whether your office's, the current approach of your office on enforcement, audits, referrals, and public reporting under the Act is delivering good value for money for taxpayers? What metrics do you use?
That's a very good question. In my view, we could do a lot better with changes to the Act, because currently a lot of resources, I review everything that comes in front of me. We review every matter. Many matters lead to files to the RCMP. Takes a lot of our time, takes a lot of the RCMP's time, then it's returned to me and closed. If we change the Act so that I could impose administrative monetary penalties so that I could deal with the issues right away, it would take less time and people would understand how the regime works. I may not have understood your question.
No, I think that's good. So typically when you come before the committee, which is often, and we appreciate you coming, you do provide us an update either in your remarks or predictably with the opening round of questions on how many files are with the RCMP. So that number changes, and do you know the change in that number since the last time that you were here?
Yeah, the last time, March 9th, they had 4, they just returned 1, they have 3.
So when that happens,
yes,
so you have reason to believe when you refer a matter to the RCMP that the Act has been broken.
Yes.
And the test that the RCMP would use is different than the test you would use.
Yes.
So when it returns to you, you having determined or being of the belief that the Act is broken, do the public get to see reports 100% of the time on those files that come back to you?
No.
Why not?
Why not? Because the way the Act is arranged right now, I can't make findings of breaches. If the RCMP and the public prosecution have decided that they can't find an offense, I don't have the authority to do that. All I can do is say I had reason to believe. Then procedural fairness would have to kick in. And usually 2 years, 3 years, 4 years have passed since the events occurred. So we have some procedural fairness issues here.
And so the resolution to that, you believe, would be the changing the Act to allow you to issue administrative monetary penalties when you've determined that breaches have occurred, and then the penalty would be levied and a public report would be made.
Absolutely.
How many matters have you referred to the RCMP during your tenure?
19.
And of those, how many have you reported on publicly?
None.
And how many times have you found breaches of the Act that did not rise to the level to which they were reported to the RCMP?
Well, obviously, I had grounds to believe in the 19 of them, and they pressed charges in 2.
Right. And but you would find times when the Act was not complied with, yes, and then you would seek to have corrective action taken, perhaps compliance retroactively have people register their meetings. Obviously, they haven't followed the law, having not been registered, but you haven't deemed it to be necessary to be reported to the police. So the act wasn't followed. You have advised the individual. You're satisfied with their compliance, and you consider the matter closed. Would you be able to quantify how many times that has occurred in your time in office?
Probably not, but I could look into it and see if I can give you a number. What happens is that the files that I send to the RCMP is because I opened an investigation because I felt that an investigation was necessary to ensure compliance. There are many times people will call us and say, hey, I'm late. They volunteered that they're late. Being late is an offense. However, I don't have to investigate. They come and raise their hand that they're late. So I just accept their registration for transparency's purposes. I do not investigate those matters, and those I don't send to the RCMP. So how often that happens? Well, I can tell you in the last year there were at least 8% of registrations were late. 5% of monthly communication reports were late. But I accept them for transparency purposes, and I can certainly will not send those to the RCMP because I don't need to investigate. I only send those to the to the RCMP those that I've actually investigated.
What is the overlap between your mandate and foreign influence detection or reporting?
So any foreign entity that lobbies public office holder, federal public office holders are subject to the Lobbying Act and should register. The Foreign Transparency Act actually goes broader than the current Lobbying Act. So there will be overlaps in registration, but the responsibility under the Lobbying Act applies even though someone may be a foreign entity or body. And we do have foreign entities in our registry.
That's it for my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Chagger?
Commissioners, nice to have you here at committee. I'm a new member to this committee, and so looking forward to our discussion. I do want to congratulate you on your top-ranking status. You should be very proud of that, and having a team members who are working as hard and recognizing that, I think goes a long way. So congratulations to you and the entire team. Just as I am a new member and I've shared that, would you just perhaps elaborate on what types of issues you're referring to the RCMP?
So of the 19 files that we have shared, some are organizations and corporations that were not registered when I was of view that they met the threshold. Some were consultant lobbyists who were not registered and in my view should have been registered. And some are former designated public office holders who should not have been lobbying because they were subject to the 5-year restriction and they lobbied. For the most part, those are the files. There were some on contingency fees as well, where we found evidence that people were agreeing to lobby based on the success, and that's not permitted under the Lobbying Act, and therefore I have sent some of those as well.
So you send a file to the RCMP investigates it. If there is charges that need to be pressed, they press those charges. Otherwise, the file's returned to you.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly how it works.
And so out of the files that you're usually referring to them, how many are being returned to you? How many are getting charges pressed?
Of the 19 files I have sent, they currently still have 3. 1 charges were laid. The file is finished. They returned that one. And then I have closed 14, and there's still 1 that was just recently sent that is still suspended that I haven't decided yet what we'll do with that.
And when you say you haven't decided what you'll do with that, what do you mean by that?
Well, the issue is when I get a file back, I need to decide if there is a compliance rationale to what is there left to investigate. This file has been investigated by me. I've sent it to the RCMP. They've investigated. No charges are laid. It's sent back to me. What am I supposed to do with that? The only thing I could do possibly is a report to Parliament to say, here's what I did. Here's what the police did, and I don't know what they did because they don't tell me. They just returned the file. And the purpose of that, and then I have procedural fairness. I would have to let the people know that these events that happened 4 or 5 years ago. So I just closed the file usually because there's nothing left to investigate.
Yes. Okay. Our time's limited, and I think
I'm
part
sorry.
of the challenge is that we have people like yourself in these important roles. Clearly, your team takes the role seriously.
Absolutely.
I have no doubt that the police and the RCMP take their role seriously. So matters are being looked at, they are being addressed, and a report to Parliament would allow the public to know what's taking place because it would be a public report. I just don't want the impression that, things don't get taken seriously. They are addressed, and I know sometimes I have conversations, I want to determine someone's guilt or innocence, but that's not how our independent judicial system or our independent agencies work, and that's part of the strength of our democracy in Canada, and I think something that's fragile around the world and something that we need to protect a lot more now. I am going to move on, thank you for that information, just to the main estimates, just to make sure that we stay on the topic that you're here for. Can you give us a breakdown and overview of your main estimates for 2026, 2027, for anybody watching, just for them to get a little bit of a snapshot of what's taking place?
So we have a budget of 6.1 million. 4.8 is for our staff. 3.6 of that is actually for my program, and the rest is for internal services. And then I've got 1.1 million left for O&M. It's actually 1.3 for O&M, and then 700,000 of that goes to MOUs with other departments to help us. We're a team of 35, and we have the exact same obligations of other departments. So,
for the newbies like me, do you want to just remind people what O&M is and what MOU is?
Sorry?
What O&M is and what MOU?
For our operational budget.
Okay.
Our operational budget is for $1.3 million. That's for contract expenditures that's outside of salary dollars.
And as a follow-up, can you walk us through the difference between the two main components, regulation of lobbying and internal services?
Sure. So the program is really, it's 27 of our employees. So they take care of advice to stakeholders, the registry, our outreach, and our compliance to make sure that we interpret and apply the Lobbying Act. The rest, internal services, is to do our finance and our contracts, access to information requests, the usual corporate internal services that other departments have.
Okay, I'm just going to jump back just to onto the top of the investigations and compliance measures. What additional compliance measures are you looking for under Recommendation 17?
I'm hoping that I could have a spectrum. Even it could start from mandatory training to administrative monetary penalties, to prohibition on lobbying, and then as well as continue to send to the RCMP if it's warranted.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gaudreau, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. If I've understood correctly, Ms. Bélanger, and again, I would like to start by saying that it's nice to see you again. I was a very new MP in 2019-2020, and so I'm happy to see that recommendations were made. I just want to ensure that your recommendations are heard. Are you disappointed with the April economic statement that there is no additional budget for your office? I didn't ask for additional funding this year. I saw the financial situation, and so I decided to work with the team that I have, and we did not request any additional funding, so I'm not disappointed. That said, I imagine that are recommendations that you would really like to see acted upon, for example, public office holders and penalties. There are a lot of countries that are moving forward with different solutions. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here. The legislation needs to be improved. I feel like I do not have the tools at my disposal in order to ensure compliance I either negotiate to ensure compliance or I have to send it to the RCMP. So someone who's late and who is continuously late, I accept, but there's nothing that I can do beyond sending it to the RCMP. They're going to send it back to me. They're not interested in investigating people who are tardy. And I understand that. So I think that I and future commissioners will need a range of penalties in order to ensure compliance. So in 2 words, your role as a commissioner, and you'll see where I'm going with my next questions. What is your goal? Our goal, our vision is to ensure that all lobbying is transparent and ethical. We can't have transparency without ethics. We can't have ethics without transparency. They go hand in hand. So if we're talking about transparency, we're not only looking to have a watchdog here. We want an incentive. And do you believe that you have every tool at your disposal to meet your goals? I think that given the few resources that we have, we do great work. And given the current framework, but the legislation definitely needs to be improved. Would it be possible to share your main priorities with the committee? I know you have about 18 of them. 21. Because we asked the question, we want to know which ones would be your main priorities. Or we asked other witnesses. Some said that it needed to be more than 5 years for public office holders. Others talked about incentives and deterrence. And I believe that it would be important for the committee to hear what your top 5 priorities would be. I would find it very difficult to say what my top 5 are. We can't focus on just one thing. But if I could say anything, I would say there needs to be registration by default. Any lobbying needs to be registered. We also need to stop distinguishing between organizations and corporations. I always have to say it depends, and it's never clear. We need a simpler piece of legislation. Most of my recommendations are to simplify the process. And I would like to have a range of penalties. You talked about the ministerial or departmental portfolio and how can we increase transparency? How can we ensure that things are as impartial as possible as well? If you're asking for an additional budget, and you're dealing with 19 files, how do you manage potential issues? There are about 10,000 lobbyists. I've had to send 19 files to the RCMP. Many people are compliant, but there are some who aren't. And Canada's a big country, so it's those who are not registered who need to be found, and I have a 35-person team. So regarding funding and independence, I joined the Agents of Parliament in 2017. We were talking about independence at that time, and we're still talking about it now. There hasn't been a solution, and it's difficult to find one. We are Agents of Parliament, and Parliament should have a specific committee for Agents of Parliament, and that committee would be focused on determining what our budget is. New Zealand, for example, has a model. It's one person by party. They are part of that committee to ensure that it is not a partisan committee. We are neutral, independent agents of Parliament, and so we would have a committee that would be able to review our requests and determine what an appropriate budget would be given the workload, and make recommendations to decision makers. It's difficult to break from traditions, but thank you, Chair.
Oui, certainement. Si votre collègue est d'accord.
Oui.
If your colleague agrees.
Commissioner, on a response that you gave to one of Ms. Chagger's questions, and that is that when you refer a file to the RCMP believing that the law has been broken, and the RCMP then returns the file to you without charges having been laid, you have the capacity, the authority to then, should you wish, table with Parliament a report of what has gone on, with you having believed a breach had occurred, affording for procedural fairness to the individual in question, detailing that the RCMP returned it without charges having been laid. But you could, should you believe it was would increase transparency or increase compliance with or awareness of the lobbying laws in Canada, you could file a report in
I don't think the Act stops me from doing that, but I have to decide. I have to complete an investigation, and I don't know what there is to complete. So I can file reports of what I have done, but to what end? Mm-hmm. And that's what I struggle with. To demonstrate that I did my work, I don't know that that is actually appropriate. We know that we've done our work. We've sent it to the RCMP. They've reviewed the matter. They've sent it back. Then 3, 4, 5 years later, it comes back, and I'm left with this, and I'm not sure what to do. And most of the time, when I look at, I weigh all of the information, and sometimes the issues have already been out in the public domain. I will say that. Then there is nothing left to be said in many of the files. Or the file is someone that nobody here would know because I have to send everything to the RCMP. So not everything is, high profile as you would think.
Oh, certainly. And I just wonder, when the question of public interest arises on awareness for the general public on compliance with the Act, and whether or not the RCMP or the prosecution service believes there's a reasonable prospect of conviction, doesn't necessarily mean that your work was done in vain. And perhaps sometimes, as we often do in the House, simply the public being aware of who's who in the zoo can sometimes serve as warning to people in government and in business on who they're dealing with. And with that, if I may, I'll turn it over, Madam Chair, to Mr. Ho.
Merci, Monsieur Roux. 2 minutes 30.
2.5 minutes.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for all the work you do in exposing Liberal insider ties to so many of the boondoggles that we've seen in the past 11 years. Commissioner, Canadians expect that when major policy decisions are made, especially ones that affect national security and domestic industry, that they're done transparently. Yet when the Liberal government moved to increase quotas for the importation of Chinese-made EVs without any clear public record of who influenced that decision, a foreign influence registry law was passed 2 years ago, as you know, but the Liberals haven't done anything to actually implement the registry. So in the absence of a foreign agents registry, how can your office determine whether foreign state-linked actors engage in unregistered or shadow lobbying, as some may call it, in this case?
I will look into matters if I have a reason to believe that I should, and if I've been given information or if there's allegations. I have a team of 35. There's 6 people in my compliance team. There is no way for me to ensure and guarantee that everyone who should be registered in the lobbyist registry are. If I receive allegations, I will look into them, however.
Right. And that's namely because your mandate relies heavily on sort of information that is disclosed to you between those registered lobbyists and Liberal public office holders. So we've heard repeated concerns about shadow lobbying, where influence is exerted outside these formal channels through informal meetings, political staff, third-party intermediaries, and events. Given the Liberal government's failure to implement the Foreign Agents Registry, do you believe Canada is currently equipped adequately to identify and deter this kind of activity?
I don't think I'm qualified to make that determination. I can only talk about the lobbyist registry and how that is working, and I can tell you that I can only rely on, if I receive allegations, if I hear of anything, if I see of anything, I'll look into it. And if there is a breach of the Lobbying Act, then I will investigate and I will forward to the RCMP. But I don't know about the foreign registry.
Could the Lobbying Act in its current state be amended to sort of broaden the scope of what it can be that could be captured, so that it could help you identify more of these cases?
I don't know if you would require broadening of the Act, because it covers quite a bit already, but certainly if I am to be turning every single rock. You will have to triple and quadruple my office. That's what would have to happen.
Merci beaucoup.
Essentially a lot.
Merci beaucoup. Ms. Souhi?
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner, for attending before the committee today. First time in ethics. I'm excited to be here. But the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying is requesting approximately $5.46 million in voted expenditures for 2026 to 2027. The departmental plan also identifies, and I quote, depth of capacity as a key organizational risk for the office as a micro-organization. My question to you is, how is the office ensuring that it can continue to fulfill its compliance, investigative, and transparency mandate while operating with relatively stable funding and limited organizational capacity?
That's a very, very good question, and I will tell you it's because of the quality of the staff that I have. And I'm going to become emotional, managing a team of 35 who really believe in the mandate, they will go above and beyond. But very often, we can't be as innovative and we can't be as proactive. We're often reactive because the demand is high, but I have a very small team and I've got one person that does everything. There is no depth of capacity. We're 35 employees with the exact same obligations as every other department out there, plus our mandate. We work extremely hard, but we love what we do. We believe in what we do. We have fun doing it, which is probably why we were ranked first. But I think the only answer to that is to have the right people in the right job, and they're all very collaborative and helpful. And then when someone is away, someone else picks it up. It's a wonderful team.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. And I think all of us can relate to the idea of having a team that collaboratively works together. And I mean, one of my staff members is here, and I wouldn't know what would happen if she wasn't here one day on the Hill. So it's the team that holds you together. So I completely understand you being emotional about it. I just want to go into a little bit about artificial intelligence and oversight. The departmental plan notes that the office will consider integrating artificial intelligence features into future registry updates. Are you able to tell us how AI tools could improve administrative efficiency and compliance oversight while still maintaining fairness, accountability, and public trust in the lobbying framework?
With great care and a lot of money. With a team of 35 right now, I can tell you we're not the most advanced in AI. I'm waiting to see where things will go. My staff have all been trained. They know to use Copilot very, very carefully. No personal information, etc. We've all been trained. AI could be used, and I'm thinking if ever the registry is updated, if some of the recommendations come in, there are ways to possibly recognize the quality of entries through AI that would have been programmed and planned. But I can't anticipate right now that AI could replace people when it comes to the registry. My head just doesn't go there, personally. But if we were to verify what could be done, it would require quite a bit of investment, and we don't have that money to look at it. So we will see what the future holds on that.
Okay. And just a little bit about accessibility and procurement priorities. I understand that your accessibility plan from 2026 to 2028 under the Treasury Board Directive on the management of procurement required continued investments in accessibility and Indigenous procurement initiatives. How is the office balancing these government-wide commitments alongside its core regulatory and oversight responsibilities within its current budget framework?
Again, we do it. We do it carefully. We do it with, we know of our obligations. We know when they come up. So accessibility, we had one of the departments actually reviewed our website and our registry and gave us some suggestions, and we did it. With Indigenous, we have less than $600,000 worth of contracts, so we don't this year, I think we will be at 12%, so we'll meet the 5% target. We always try to have Indigenous contracting. We meet our obligations. We know what we have to do, but I will never, jeopardize the core mandate for the purposes of meeting corporate government obligations. But so far, we've been able to do both. But it's difficult. It's demanding. But we do it.
Okay.
Thank you
Perfect.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Madame Gaudreau, pour 2 minutes 30, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. We had 70 meetings on foreign interference and Chinese foreign interference, and if we want to change things, we really need to act. And what I'm seeing, especially with your office, and I will be asking you a question, if there was more work on prevention with all the resources we would give you, would we still have 19 files sent to the RCMP that would need to be assessed regarding their compliance? I'm not sure that I understood your question. If we focused on prevention, because currently you can only act after the fact, but if you were proactive, I would say that we do a lot of proactive work. The compliance team is a 6-person team. We made 196 presentations this year. We reached out to 2,000 people, and so we do a lot of awareness raising. We have updates on our website. We're on LinkedIn. We truly do try to be proactive, but again, it's a 2-person team. I've done more than 30 presentations in the last 6 months, so we could do more if we had more resources and more team members. If we had more penalties, well, those 2,000 files that were late, well, maybe we wouldn't have so many late files. So for those 2,000, after the first 2 received a fine, maybe there would be fewer cases after that. Last question. I understand that you are concerned with AI, and I imagine that you're aware that there's an investigation, a joint investigation with the privacy commissioners, and I'll be asking these questions at the next panel concerning ChatGPT and OpenAI. And you know there's a new platform that's coming called CanChat. Have you heard of it? No. It's a AI chatbot for the federal government. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau. It's now, the floor is now Mr. Gould's for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. I've known you since 2007, and it's nice to see you again. During a previous government, parliamentary secretaries, ministers, prime ministers were designated public office holders and had higher responsibilities regarding lobbyists. Even when it wasn't during official meetings, if people spoke to us about different programs, we often had to ask whether or not somebody was a registered lobbyist, because it's not necessarily clear. When they come to see us in our office, we know that they are lobbyists, they might be registered, we expect that they're registered. Is that still the case, or do members have more obligations now than they did pre-2015? The designated public office holders, that includes MPs. So if a lobbyist meets with you and speaks to you, and it's a meeting that was pre-organized, they will need to submit a monthly report that they met with you. Members of Parliament you don't have any obligations unless I need to call you to verify the content that was shared with you by a lobbyist. Any designated public office holder, if they are met with by a lobbyists and I have questions and I call you, you need to respond. Other than that, you don't have any responsibilities, except that you can't lobby for 5 years after you leave your post. Let's go back to 2024. We know that the Prime Minister was a special advisor for the Liberal Party, for the government. He was also vice chair at Brookfield. I don't know if he was registered as a lobbyist at that time. He had access to the Prime Minister and to the clerk of the Privy Council or members of the Privy Council. And so it seemed to be a bit of a gray area. You talked about transparency and ethics. In that case, is there a way to consult the registry to see whether or not he was registered? You can see whether or not he was registered, but in order to be registered, there are many criteria. And again, this is another series of issues that need to be dealt with. So you need to be salaried or paid, and you need to communicate with a public office holder on behalf of a client or on behalf of one's employer. If those are not met, the Lobbying Act does not apply. We also know that on May 6, 2025, Sam Pollock from Brookfield met with the Prime Minister, who's his former employer, directly or indirectly. I don't think he was registered as a lobbyist, but beyond saying, hi, how are you, there might have been things that were discussed. And so how can we know what was said, and how can we protect transparency in cases like that? Well, if I hear about potential lobbying, I can investigate. And then I need to send that to the RCMP. You can also make access to information requests to see if there were any minutes. So you could go through an ATIP request. A meeting could last 7 or 8 minutes while speaking outside, and there won't be any minutes ever. So we're limited, and that's the reality. It's a way to skirt one's obligations towards lobbying and transparency. I agree that transparency is so important, and that's why I have recommendations in order to increase the scope for transparencies. Meetings that are not organized but happen on the street, at the airport, I believe that these should be registered. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. You had 30 seconds left. Mr. Chang.
Yes. I noticed that Indigenous contracting results were 9.7% in 23-24, 3.4% in 24-25, with a forecast of 9.2% for 25-26, and a target of 5% for 26-27. Can you tell us more about these figures and what is driving the changes?
Sure. So the way the policy of the Treasury Board works is that we have been assigned a target of 5%. So I don't get to pick that. That's the 5% target. And it's 5% of the contracts that you award. It's not contracts that you've paid. So if a certain year we have a contract that's 3 years, it's the year that is awarded, but then year 2 and year 3, the numbers go down because it's not the year that we've awarded, which is why it fluctuates so much. We had targeted last year, I think it's 9 that you said. I think we'll meet 12% because we ended up buying, we were in the cycle of having to buy new laptops. We bought them from an Indigenous company, so we will meet 12%. Next year, we don't do a lot of contracts. I have no money, so we do just a little bit. We always try to prioritize Indigenous groups. We will likely do an evaluation this year, so we'll see if we can get an Indigenous company. But the 5% is the target that's given to us.
Thank you very much for your effort.
You're welcome.
And under government-wide priorities, can you speak to the programs that your office is undertaking in relation to United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development?
Yeah, I think that what we do there is really cooperate both at the national level. So with my colleagues we have a network of my colleagues that do the same type of work as I do. We also I'm invited often with the OECD to participate in work there. And Canada is seen as a leader, as one of the countries that has the longest standing law in lobbying, and so therefore that's how I contribute to that.
Thank you. And your departmental plan places a significant emphasis on education and outreach. How important is proactive education in improving compliance with the Lobbying Act, particularly for smaller organizations, nonprofit, and individuals who might not fully understand their obligations?
I think it's paramount. The Lobbying Act is extremely, I'll use the word complicated, but it has a lot of nuances, and it's difficult for people to read and understand. So we do a lot of outreach. We highly recommend people to call us. And as I say, we've done almost 200 sessions in the past year. So we do advertise a lot, and we've proactively are telling us, come and meet the commissioner. I do our sessions with people, and I've been able to meet over 2,000 people from across the country. So it is absolutely key.
Thank you. And one of the themes in your recommendation is improving timeliness and consistency of registration and disclosures. From your perspective, how can we modernize reporting requirement in a way that improves transparency without creating unnecessary administrative burdens, especially for smaller stakeholders?
Yeah. Every time I hear the word burden, there has been no evidence that there's a burden. To go in the registry, creating an account takes 5 minutes, and inputting the information takes 20 to 25 minutes. There is no burden in the registration. The burden is trying to figure out if you should register and what kind of information you need to put in the registry, because depending on who you are, the information, it depends. It depends who you are, and depends if you work for an org or a corporation. So the challenge, and what I think we have to do, is simplify the Act, which is what my recommendations are all about. If that is simplified, it will be very easy for people to go on the registry and actually just go in, open an account, and put in the information.
Okay. And that's why education is way more important, I guess?
Well, education is important now because the law's so complicated. But I think if it were simpler, we will be able to support people and in actually registering a lot easier. But right now, people need to figure out if they're even subject to the Lobbying Act.
Thank you. And my final question is, Recommendation 6 proposed broader disclosure requirement regarding employees who lobby on behalf of organizations. Can you elaborate more on how that recommendation would improve transparency for Canadians while still remaining practical for business and organizations to implement?
I'm not sure. Recommendation 6 is, which one is that one? All employees. Oh, it's because right now organizations have to list every single employee who lobbies, but corporations only have to put in the senior officers and the senior officers and employees who lobby more than a significant part of their work. So that means there are people in corporations right now who do not have to put their name in the registry. And if their name's not in the registry, then they're not subject to a code. So I just want, if you work for an organization or corporation, everyone's name should be in the registry. It's adding names. That's all.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Alors, Monsieur O.
Mr. O. 2.5 minutes.
Does your office as lobbying commissioner have the authority to proactively investigate potential undisclosed lobbying, or are you limited to acting when formal complaints are filed?
No, I have absolutely all discretion, and I can tell you that most files that we open, it's because we've observed something or seen something. I don't need to get an allegation.
Okay, so based on how much resources you have, you said you have 35 staff and $6.1 million operating budget. How much of undisclosed lobbying activity do you think goes on undetected?
Goes on?
Undetected.
I'm hoping not a lot. I'm hoping that those people who do this as a profession, they're paid to lobby. I know that they take their obligations seriously, and I'm hoping that those who should be registered are registered. But some groups are unaware that what they're doing is lobbying, and they call our office and they say, hey, I've been doing this, and somebody told me maybe I should register.
We can't expect everyone to be that honest to call in, right? There's got to be some that slip through the cracks. And again, it's not no fault to yourself. But
it's possible, but there's no way of me knowing.
So my last question. So if a senior individual at a lobbying firm or a consulting firm avoids registration by claiming they are only providing strategic advice, while junior registered lobbyists formally conduct communications, like we've seen with multiple former senior Liberal staff, former Liberal MPs, and former Liberal ministers. Does that undermine the spirit of the Lobbying Act?
Well, the Lobbying Act right now, it regulates communications with public office holders. If you're not the one communicating and you're hired to give the strategic advice, that's not lobbying.
Is that a problem in your view?
Well, it can be, and should it be covered? But I don't know how we would.
Do you think it should be covered?
Possibly, but how would we regulate that? And whether or not it belongs in the lobbying office or in the conflict of interest and ethics of those who leave office.
But there's a cause for concern.
Sometimes.
Merci. Ms. Jagger?
Thank you. I just want to, I guess, get it on the record. Mr. Ho gives this impression that it's just Liberals who are, I guess, under the act of who you deal with. Can you just remind us who all do you deal with?
Which party is whomever leaves office, and there's public servants that leave office. It's not a criteria for me. I look at facts, period.
Perfect. Commissioner, before arriving at your recommendations for the Lobbying Act, can you just share, who did you consult with? Any individuals, organizations? And can you just tell us a little bit more about the process before you came to your recommendations?
So when I came here for my first nomination back in 2017, I was asked if I could be ready in the spring of 2018 with recommendations. That gave me 4 months to get ready. So I can tell you I relied originally on the 2012 recommendations of the previous commissioner, and then I started working from my own experience. And then it's really based on experience, what I've heard, what I have observed. Have I consulted organizations and corporations? No.
They would be able to perhaps share how complicated it is to understand it or not, or you just have the impression that it's complicated?
I speak to a lot of stakeholders all the time, so obviously their input I've been hearing over the last 9 years. So, okay. Of course, but did I actually do a formal consultation? No.
But you have gained those insights?
Oh, of course.
Excellent. As a follow-up to the first round, what additional compliance measures are you looking for under Recommendation 17?
The compliance measures would be the same as I mentioned previous, which would be possibly mandatory training, administrative monetary penalties, prohibition, and continuing to send to the RCMP.
And on Recommendation 4, specifically regarding registration requirements with respect to awarding of grants and contributions, can you walk us through why you included this as one of your recommendations?
So it used to be that organizations and corporations only needed to register if they met a 32-hour threshold, which meant that for most people who applied for grants and contributions would not need to register because it didn't meet the 32. Now that I've reduced it to 8 hours, a lot of people are just simply applying, will now meet the 8 hours and need to register. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people have concerns about that, and I understand that. But right now, the law is written as such that if you communicate with public office holders about obtaining a grant or a contribution, you must register as a lobbyist. And I think if there's a public process already in place and the public program for which you know that groups are going to be applying, that should be excluded from the Lobbying Act.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gaudreau, pour 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
J'ai simplement une offre.
I would just like to say, or would like to ask you what your main suggestion would be. I know that you've made recommendations, but there have been changes since 2007 and since your arrival in 2017. I'll just give you a minute to speak to us. We need to increase transparency and increase the number of registrations. The legislation needs to be simpler and more fair, that anyone who lobbies needs to be subject to the same criteria for registration. There needs to be penalties that are proportionate to the offense, because that is currently not the case. That's pretty much it. If we can simplify the legislation, our work at the office will be easier as well, and perhaps I won't need to make requests for additional funding or resources. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us. Meeting suspended.
Bienvenue.
Welcome. I would like to welcome our witnesses for the second hour from the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Welcome, Mr. Commissioner Philippe Dufresne, and Marc Chénier, Deputy Commissioner and Senior General Counsel. Thank you for being with us today. Commissioner, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada's main estimates for fiscal year 2026-2027. With me today is Marc Chénier, Deputy Commissioner and Senior General Counsel. My office operates in a rapidly changing environment, one in which unprecedented volumes of Canadians' personal information are being collected and used. Evolving technology bring opportunities to connect, to create, and to innovate. At the same time, technological advances pose new and complex issues for privacy.
Prioritizing privacy is more important than ever. Appropriate safeguards are essential to ensuring that Canadians can benefit from new technologies without giving up their fundamental right to privacy. Just yesterday, I announced the findings of my joint investigation into OpenAI's AI-powered chatbot, ChatGPT. Through this milestone investigation conducted with counterparts in Quebec, British Columbia, and Alberta, we identified privacy issues and made recommendations that led to improved protections for Canadians' personal information. I expect that the findings will also inform and advance the privacy protective design of other AI-powered technologies. As Privacy Commissioner, I continue to champion the protection of privacy in support of responsible innovation, setting the standard for a safer digital world for individuals while supporting innovation, economic competitiveness, and Canada's digital sovereignty. Several factors influence my office's capacity to deliver on our mandate and strategic priorities as effectively as possible. These include, for example, a significant increase in the complexity and volume of our work, fiscal constraints, and reliance on the courts to implement investigative findings. Over the past year, my office has concluded hundreds of investigations, including several high-profile ones such as TikTok, Google, and 23andMe. Earlier today, I released the findings of an investigation into breaches at the Canada Revenue Agency. Le nombre de plaintes que le commissariat a reçues au cours du dernier exercice a augmenté de 4...
The number of complaints received by my office in the last fiscal year has increased by 82% to more than 6,000 complaints. This rise is also placing increased demand on the OPC's limited resources. At the time of writing our departmental plan, I noted that the temporary funding that had allowed my office to reduce investigative backlogs had expired. I am pleased that the government has since approved an extension of this funding for 5 years, as noted in the spring economic update. Without permanent funding, however, we will continue to face long-term resource constraints that limit my office's ability to effectively carry out its mission and keep pace with technological developments.
That it is reviewing the Privacy Act, and I also remain optimistic about movement on private sector law reform. Canada needs modernized privacy laws to reflect this modern world. In early 2025, I launched a transformation plan aimed at building greater collaboration and cohesion across my office and streamlined processes, supporting more integrated, agile, and strategic approaches. These changes support my strategic priority of maximizing our impact for Canadians. Le plan de transformation comprend la mise en œuvre d'autres approches comme alternative aux enquêtes complètes nécessitant beaucoup de ressources.
The transformation plan includes implementing alternative approaches to full resource-intensive investigations, such as promoting compliance strategically, shifting to engagement over investigations, and using all the tools at our disposal to better serve Canadians.
Priorities addressing and advocating for privacy in this time of technological change and championing children's privacy. I'm committed to growing the OPC's internal expertise on emerging technologies. Our team has developed an in-house AI that will deepen our understanding of a technology that we regulate while also helping to optimize our work. To support the children's privacy priority, we've undertaken a number of initiatives, such as establishing an OPC Youth Council. And earlier this week, I announced new guidance documents on age assurance. Collaboration continues to be an important tool that extends well beyond compliance actions. My role as chair of the Global Privacy Assembly and participation in the G7 Data Protection and Privacy Authorities Roundtable ensure that Canada is at the table to help influence the direction and future of privacy protection around the world. En cette période de changement rapide sans précédent,
At this time of rapid, unprecedented change, prioritizing privacy must be a collective imperative. Trust in how data is handled is an increasingly important factor in how individuals interact with government, businesses, and technology, which is a significant consideration, particularly during challenging economic times. Thank you. I will now be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes.
And I'm wondering if you can tell us about just going one step further than your report or beyond your report yesterday about OpenAI. There's much conversation about protecting youth on social media platforms and with AI chatbots. And of course, if there were to be age limits put in place, there would need to be a way to verify users' ages. What concerns do you have or risks does that raise? And are there examples, including in the EU or with any EU countries, with digital IDs, digital passports having been compromised by hacks or other breaches?
Thank you for the question. So earlier this week, I launched our guidance on age assurance that is the result of significant consultation with industry, a children's group, and like-minded organizations. And so we list a number of considerations, and really key to those is the protection of privacy, the safeguarding, making sure that you're not getting more information that you need, making sure that you have the appropriate measures, that these are not being used to identify individuals, but rather to vet the age. And also we set guidelines and factors to consider into when should you have age verification. And it would of course be based on laws, but it's in the absence of laws, it's based on risk, it's based on the likelihood of a significant number of children using the site. In terms of your question of age verification tools and breaches, the European Union recently launched an app or made it public. And in the early days, there were concerns about a hacker being able to go in and defeat the safeguards. And so that's a reminder that you need to make sure that before launching the product, you put in place the sufficient safeguard, the sufficient testing, so that this does not occur.
Okay, I have a couple other questions. I want to ask you about Signal, and I want to ask you about the encrypted end-to-end messaging app, and I want to ask you about TikTok. But before I do, can you tell me what would prevent or what would be the limitations of use of something like Interac in terms of identifying or providing sufficient age verification? That's a system that's widely used in Canada. It's tied to bank accounts, which, of course, government ID is used for, and simple like a red light, green light being generated through something like banking without having to banking portals, without having to provide any other identifying factors to the service provider or application. So would there be anything that would prevent that from being useful in an application to verify the age of users?
I would need to assess the exact tool technically to see the safeguards and so on. But I think what you're suggesting is having a tool that only takes as much information as it needs and only gives as much information and validation as it needs. And I think that this is consistent with the guidance that we're putting forward. You shouldn't be saying this is my name and this is my date of birth and all of that. You want to find a way to say, are you an adult or are you a child? And are you allowed to use that or not?
Right. What guidance have you issued on the use of Signal specifically? You're familiar with the application?
We've not issued guidance on this specific signal, so I'd have to know the specific concern that you would have or aspect.
Are you familiar with the application?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
So in the EU, there's been a string of incidents where there's been a large-scale global cyber campaign where Russian-based government-sponsored actors are seeking to compromise the use of this service by government officials in EU countries. And if it's not a subject that you're familiar with, we'll move on to the next. But I was curious. This has increased in popular use in Canada, and when people believe something to be secure, they increase their risk aversion to send sensitive information. Of course, decreases, and particularly in the company that we're in today with elected officials. If you don't have specific guidance, I won't ask you to create it on the spot, but just wondering if this is something that that you've considered or would even be under your purview.
Well, I certainly, from a privacy standpoint, if we see concerns of a specific industry, of a specific product, we can issue guidance on it, or we can issue investigations which may lead to findings. I think that if there is a discovered concern about privacy, then there's a role for authorities to flag that. There can also be concerns on national security aspects, and then that becomes a role for the government institutions to say either the government shouldn't use it, parliamentarians, or flag those concerns. But I agree with you that if there are risks and they're known, Canadians should be made aware of them.
Merci beaucoup. It's
Okay.
finished for you.
6 minutes?
No, it's finished for you. Sorry.
We were having such a good time.
Yeah, I can say. Mr. Chang.
Madam Chair. Commissioner, thank you for being here with us. I have two questions on man estimates. So your departmental plan highlights ongoing work related to artificial intelligence, including the creation of internal AI tools. Can you please elaborate on how AI is currently being used in your office, and what operational benefit will be achieved by AI, and how you are ensuring that its use remains aligned with privacy and ethical standards?
Thank you for the question. So two things on that. Of course, yesterday I issued my decision on OpenAI and ChatGPT. So we had been investigating this, and during that time, I had instructed that we not use the tool during the time of the investigation, other than for the purposes of our investigation. But we have developed our in-house AI tool called Privia, and it's quite contained, and it's very safe. And we are taking small steps in terms of how can we leverage this technology and be a best example of saying, well, we want the safeguards, we want the use, we want the efficiencies, and so we are doing this in a gradual manner, and we hope to expand its use. But for the moment, it is very much all in-house.
Well, thank you. Good to hear this. I see that for year 24-25, your actual results for Indigenous contract was 10.7%, while your planned target for the year 26-27 is 5%. Could you help explain the factors behind the figures and how your office approach Indigenous procurement as part of this, its commitment to economic reconciliation?
So I don't have the specific details on this answer for you, but I would be happy to provide this in writing. We do report on the use and the contracting. There have not been major trends or concerns or anything that come to my mind at this time. If my team who are here wish to advise me before the end of the hour, I can report to you, but otherwise we'll report to you in writing.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to clarify the apparent contradiction between your finding and that of BC's privacy regulator. Your office says that the matter involving OpenAI is resolved, while BC says it is not. So in practical terms, is OpenAI currently operating in violation of BC's privacy law? And if so, what enforcement mechanism or consequences are available for regulators? And what are the implications for British Columbians who are using ChatGPT today?
Thank you. So Those questions would be better answered by my colleague, Michael Harvey, who's the commissioner for BC. But what our report says in terms of their finding is that because of the specifics of their law and the specific definition of implicit consent under their law, they were unable to find that the type of AI training being done by ChatGPT, namely by scraping of information on the web, could be justified under that definition. And from my perspective, under federal law, I found that federal law was more flexible, and it allowed me to interpret the expectations of Canadians and to interpret the safeguards being put in place in a way that would allow the protection of privacy, but also the development of that training of AI. So from a federal standpoint, it is now compliant with federal law.
Well, thank you. And Commissioner, the review of the Privacy Act comes at a time when Canadians expect both strong privacy protection and modern, efficient public services. In your view, how can Parliament strike the balance between protecting personal information and enabling better service delivery across government?
Well, I think that the government's consultation is a very good start in doing that because it highlights a number of things. It highlights, one, you need to have strong and stronger privacy protection. Privacy is going to be the basis for trust, whether for the strong economy, whether for innovation, whether for government services. So that's number one. And so reinforcing things like order-making power, the obligation to report breaches, the obligation to have safeguard, treating privacy as a fundamental right, that's key. But the consultation also talks about the need for departments to be able to share more information with each other in appropriate cases to deliver better services for Canadians. And I think that is something that needs to happen in appropriate cases with appropriate safeguards. So I think that the approach of saying in some cases you need more flexibility, but as long as you have the strong privacy protections, then you have both. And Canadians deserve to have both strong, effective government services and strong privacy.
Do I still have time? Okay. So can you speak to the importance of amending Privacy Act to recognize the privacy as a fundamental right in Canada, underscore the importance of enabling service delivery and advanced reconciliation with Indigenous people?
Well, these are all elements that I agree with the government that we have to achieve. So we need strong government, effective government services. Canadians deserve that. And so how to make sure that the law isn't too strict and forces Canadians to start over every single time they need to do something. So there's perhaps a need for more flexibility there. You need to take into consider as well the perspective and interests of Indigenous peoples and lots of discussion on privacy about whether it's only individual rights or whether there should be a collective component to this and recognize that in the interpretation. And then privacy as a fundamental right is something that is more important than ever, which is the recognition that privacy has to be protected. It is not something that should be sacrificed in the name of innovation or in the name of the public interest. It's not a zero-sum game. Because privacy is what makes us free. Privacy is what enables all the other fundamental rights that we hold dear. So I think those three pillars are absolutely key.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gaudreau, pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. It's great to see you again. I have so many questions. Let's talk about OpenAI. You were 4 commissioners to look into it. Can you give us an example of non-compliance with OpenAI? With that investigation, we saw that in developing OpenAI and its models, they were not compliant. They had obtained too much information regarding Canadians, everything that's online, on forums, on social media. All of this information was used to train their models, and so there could have been sensitive or medical information or information on young people. There was also misinformation and disinformation. What's said on social media is not always true, but the AI was giving answers that made it seem like that was true, and so we needed to have tools to know where the answers were coming from. We also found that consent was not clearly obtained for Canadian users, and so they had to work on that. This investigation allowed us to flag all of those issues to OpenAI, and we led them to making changes. The tool that exists now is very different from the initial tool, and that's largely thanks to our recommendations. You talked about Privia. No, we're talking about ChatGPT Model 5. And now they're compliant. At the federal level, they are. By implementing our recommendations, there are things that they need to do in the coming months. Training or simple information, but we will be following that closely because they have made these commitments. So they will be compliant at the federal level. My colleagues from the provinces had their own legislation where OpenAI was not compliant. Thank you for that answer. Have you heard or looked into CanChat, the application that's going to be used by federal public servants? We haven't looked into it yet. Well, it's coming, and so I think that it would be great for you to look into it. Privacy is a concern for me, and so is national security. Next question. Can you talk about your investigative abilities? You currently give advice, but do you have any recommendations? I made recommendations for modernizing the legislation. There's a lot being done in the public sector, and we are waiting for a new bill for the private sector. What's missing would be order-making powers. I don't currently have that. I can't impose any fines, and that is a very serious shortcoming or issue in Canada. Most or many other countries have these models, and this ability needs to exist. We want companies to invest in solutions, and it would help if I could say that if you don't do that, there could be a fine. And we're talking about an offense of $1,000 versus a fine that is proportionate. In C-27, in the previous parliament, that possibility was there, and it was a good thing. And I hope that that will be the case. We're listening to you here. In 2019, Chair, I was making a recommendation to decorrelate the social insurance number, and I get the impression that we are not keeping pace with what needs to be done. And you are impartial in your role, and I think that we should act differently here at the committee. I have 2 minutes left, so responsibilities, percentage, those are all important. Your investigation talked about the collaboration by OpenAI. If you hadn't had this collaboration, would you have had the tools and the powers necessary in order to force that information? I certainly would not have had that ability. In our investigation into Halo, Pornhub's company, that happened. We made recommendations. We said that explicit sexual material, well, there needs to be consent on all sides because it is extremely sensitive information. And when there were sexual videos that were shared without consent, we wanted them to be easily removed. I was a part of that study, but people could upload it again. And once things are uploaded, it's too late. And the company, to this day, refuses to implement our recommendations. So this is not a theoretical issue. Well, they're moving headquarters, and then well, even if headquarters is not in Canada, we have jurisdiction, and that's important. If Canadians are impacted by this, then we can act, and we will. But the issue is that it's not all organizations who will work with us. OpenAI did it, and that's to their credit, and there was good collaboration there. But if we had those tools, if we had to carry out privacy assessments from the start, well, perhaps some of these changes would have been made more quickly if there were clearer definitions as well. There are a lot of those things, and we want issues to be dealt with quickly instead of having to move to an investigation. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. O, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to have you back, Commissioner. Commissioner, in a report today, your office, the Privacy Commissioner, confirmed that the CRA reported more than 42,000 material privacy breaches dating back to as far as 2020. Now, Canadians hand over their most sensitive financial information to this Liberal government under the threat of fines and penalty. In your view, does the sheer scale and duration of these breaches demonstrate a systemic failure of governance and oversight inside the CRA under this Liberal government's watch?
Well, our investigation found that there had been a significant number of privacy breaches since 2020, 42,000, more or less. And so our investigation looked at what were the safeguards, what are the detection mechanisms, what are the tools being used, because you can't always prevent breaches; they will happen. But you need to have the appropriate safeguards, especially if you are a very attractive target. And so we looked at a number of aspects, and we found that there was a lot of goodwill, there's a lot of effort being done, but there were gaps given the very sophisticated bad actors that were fraudulently making those claims, and we've made a number of recommendations that will be put in place.
Back in because of these breaches back in 2020. The Liberals have announced that they are implementing new measures within the CRA to protect Canadians' privacy. So since 2024, how many times have you met with the Liberal minister responsible for the CRA regarding implementing these measures?
I have not met with the responsible minister for the CRA, but in the context of the investigation, we have had many meetings with CRA officials, and I have had meetings with the commission.
To get it straight, we had you at the Science and Research Committee a couple of weeks ago, and you testified there that the Liberal government has not consulted you when they were thinking about importing more Chinese-made EVs, and now the Liberal government has not consulted you in implementing these changes. It's a pretty serious concern, and the Liberal ministers can't even find time in their days to meet you even once. I mean, that really goes to show that the Liberals don't take Canadian privacy seriously. It's not a one-off. We're seeing a pattern here. So, Commissioner, according to your office, these unauthorized disclosures within the CRA involve taxpayer information being improperly accessed and even modified by unauthorized bad actors over a period of years before being fully reported. How is it possible that a federal agency as large as the CRA failed to detect, contain, and report tens of thousands of breaches? We understand a couple of breaches, in real time. Does this point to a culture inside the Liberal government where privacy compliance is treated as an afterthought?
Well, I want to say just on your previous question, I did have meetings with the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, and I did have meetings with the Commissioner of the CRA. So there have been discussions. In this case, we found that the measures.
But sorry, did you meet with the Artificial Intelligence Minister about these breaches, though?
Not about these breaches.
No, okay,
no.
that's what I'm kind of talking about, the breaches, right?
Right.
I understand there's other initiatives. So there were no meetings with Liberal ministers or secretaries of state regarding these breaches during this time. Okay, sorry, continue with your answer.
So what we found in this investigation was that there were insufficient measures put in place. There were efforts that were being put, and that there were improvements that were being made, but it wasn't enough. So the multi-factor authentication is one example. Back in 2021, it was not mandatory; it was optional. It was made mandatory in 2021, but we know that multi-factor authentication is an important tool to prevent these fraudulent claims. So now it's mandatory. But we found that the types of multi-factor authentication are not all equal. Some are stronger than others. Some are weaker. And so we identified that despite improvements, more had to be done, and we made the recommendations to that effect and look forward to this being put in place.
Yeah, and in your report, in addition to the multi-factor authentication and industry best practices, which you just discussed right now, you also discussed that the CRA was unable to provide details of every confirmed breach that it had reported due to limitations of its tracking system, reading that from the report. And also, somehow attackers were successful in bypassing the authentication process to access, and the CRA was not able to explain that. So it's not even just there's a problem, they don't even know how to fix the problem. So the Liberals frequently lecture Canadians about misinformation, cybersecurity, and digital trust. What message does this send to Canadians about the federal government's own competence in protecting sensitive data?
Rapidement, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Well, we found that there were things that had to be improved, and they include some of what you've described in terms of identifying the threat, finding the reason, and being able to track. So all of those are part of our recommendations.
Merci beaucoup. Ms. Church, for 5 minutes.
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you again for appearing before our committee. Just to maybe offer you a chance to further explain a line of questioning that my colleague across the table was just raising. Can you describe in the course of your investigation pertaining to the CRA, the type of involvement or cooperation or input that you would have had from the CRA?
It's been very good collaboration. We talk about that in the report, and we note the work of the public servants that we've interviewed and their dedication and the challenging situation that it is in, and that it is a very attractive target for bad actors. And this is why we held them to the high standard, because this is very sensitive information of Canadians, and the system has to be robust. And we found that it wasn't sufficiently robust, but with the recommendations that we made, I am encouraged by the steps that will be taken and that have been taken.
That's great. I mean, and I would note that I think the CRA has welcomed your report and very much thank you for recognizing the CRA's commitment and its efforts in aligning its security, identity, and governance practices, specifically with respect to containment and mitigation, and the work that's being done to, of course, continually improve protections for Canadians' information. But Mr. Commissioner, I'd like to actually take you back to your other study around age assurance, because I do think that there is a very important conversation that's taking place right now between efforts to reduce online harms for children and youth, while at the same time being very cognizant of the need to reinforce, recognize, even enhance children's privacy online. So can you tell our committee a little bit about the key privacy considerations that study that the conclusions that you came to on age assurance?
Thank you for the question. So we talk about the best interest of the child. We talk about the fact that age assurance will be appropriate, will be a legitimate approach to mitigating those risks in appropriate cases, that you should look at the risks that are there for children, making sure that you are not using it too much in terms of preventing children too much access to certain sites, making sure that you are not leaving bad practices on websites, and that it shouldn't be, in our view, the first reflex to say we're not going to allow children to have access to it. We should try to fix the underlying problems, but in certain cases you won't be able to fix them quickly enough, and then limiting access to children will be appropriate. We talk about how we have to make sure that whatever tool is being used, that it is proportionate, that there are necessary safeguards, that is not collecting too much information. But at the end of the day, we find that it is possible and in certain cases appropriate to have age verification, because we need to protect children from the harms that they can experience in the online world.
Well, and this connects quite a bit to the work that you've been doing around a children's privacy code as well, in terms of other means of protections to wrap around the whole experience of children's information and data, both online and across media.
It has to be part of how we look at everything, the best interest of the child. It was something that I recommended be strengthened in the C-27. It was already a big part of the law in terms of recognizing minors' privacy. And so this is very much a frame through which we're looking at those things. We'll be coming out with our children's code soon. We have just published what we heard report based on our initial consultation. So that's going to set out beyond age verification how we want to see privacy law looked at, and we'll be in fact having my own youth council look at this and give us their views and also how we can communicate better to children.
30
And
seconds.
what are some of the 30 seconds? Maybe just very quickly then, do you have any guidance for us in terms of some of the design considerations that you would offer as we think about how to move towards age assurance?
Well, the design considerations have to emphasize safety, has to emphasize data minimization, has to make it easy for the users to use. They have to be able to trust it. It has to respect privacy. It has to not keep information longer than it needs to. And you have to avoid situations where this is going to be used or perceived to be used to re-identify individuals or to track individuals. So this will protect privacy and it will generate trust.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gaudreau pour 5 minutes.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have 6 minutes. I would have so many questions for you. Have you heard of prescription IT? There was a transition because Prescription is a platform that was not used for prescriptions. We're going to use TELUS Health, and they have 85% of the IP for that platform. Now, there's been more funding for prescription IT. We're talking about $300 million. Now we're going to migrate towards TELUS, but they are not guaranteeing that they will protect privacy. And so, are you aware of that transition? I'm not aware of the details there. But if there are any issues with protecting privacy, we need to flag any issues, and privacy concerns need to be raised. Generally, companies understand their obligations, and I would raise your concerns. We need to take advantage of technology and innovation, but we also need to do so while protecting privacy. I feel like it's always a race to find the best application, the best technological development, and I'm saddened to hear that there was no consultation beforehand. Count chat is something that you should have already looked into, or can chat rather. We don't have a date for its implementation, but we met with Treasury Board and deputy ministers, and I believe that we should look into the tool before it's being implemented. I feel like we're trying to we need to find ways so that in these cases where our legislation is incapable of keeping up, you need to have tools at your disposal. Would you do things differently if you had such tools? One of the recommendations that I made regarding both the public sector and private sector legislation is the obligation to assess these privacy factors, and that there needs to be an obligation to consult my office as well. I believe that that would add that layer of protection, and people would feel reassured that things were verified before their implementation, because you're correct. There's often a lot of pressure for businesses and at government as well. They want to act quickly. Sometimes we act too slowly, but acting quickly can be important. But protecting privacy by default will lead to more trust. If you move too quickly without that trust, you'll be slowed down. Privacy is at the heart of innovation. And Chair, what happens is that when a child reaches an adult age, there's more harm, and There are more cyber attacks. I hope that now that you're a majority government that you'll act. You need to act urgently. I could share a lengthy list, and I hope that after this meeting, you will share any red flags so that we can act as quickly as possible. Thank you. I had more time, and I have many questions. So if you could submit that to us so we could focus on specific priorities and what would be the main issue right now with technological developments. We have just done a lot of work on AI and privacy, and that was a priority. These models are made using a lot of data, and not only with AI. How do we protect this data that is being sought? We want to encourage innovation. We don't want to slow the development of these tools that are going to be very helpful. And technology can even help us protect privacy more. It can protect us against fraud and breaches. So there's a lot of technology being developed rapidly. There's quantum data. And so a lot of work is being done on that front. But these advances can't be made without factoring in privacy. We need to see what information is given, how we ensure accountability, the privacy of children. They are increasingly exposed, and we are seeing the harms of social media, and that's being recognized in some court decisions. And so we need to strike a balance between removing the access to certain tools, but we need to see just how far we're going to go. Some might ban the use of social media, some might ban AI tools. So how do we manage all of that? And thirdly, is on data sovereignty and the exchange of data. And given the geopolitical situation, we are concerned with what's going to happen in other countries. We might want to keep our strategic data within our own country, and so this could have an impact on international communication, for example, and we need a framework regarding when Canadian data is leaving the country and what the expectations are. I gave you more time because the answer was very interesting, and you were really on a roll. Mr. Gould, you have 5 minutes. And if you're on a roll, if you are also on a roll, I'll give you some extra time as well. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne, for being with us. It's really very important. I have 3 things that I would like to raise. I received mortgage advisors, a group this week at my riding. They want a person to be able to share their T4 and financial information with their advisor to pre-qualify. But they asked me that, and they told me they would like to verify the validity of the T4. Some people might be falsifying their T4 in order to get that pre-qualification. What was raised with me, is that true? I'd have to look into the file. But among the measures that we have requested from the CRA is that there be an increased number of verifications. We don't want there to be so many cases of fraud where people are changing information in an account or where people will have access to benefits that they shouldn't. There needs to be measures in place because if the information is sensitive, it needs to be properly protected, but I haven't heard regarding that specific file. but this might also be of provincial jurisdiction, but it's important to have the necessary safeguards, and they need to be proportionate to the sensitivity of the data. I have another question. StatsCan sent out information regarding registration, but there are people who came to my office who said that they're not able to do the registration, and they don't want to send their information over the internet. They want to use paper, they want to mail it. They believe that their information will be safer by traditional mail. I'm sure the StatsCan has implemented all the necessary measures, but do they have the obligation to send this information over the internet, or can they say that they would prefer to send it by mail? StatsCan would be better placed to respond than I am regarding what is allowed and what isn't. I think it would be important to ask them that question, and if there are any concerns, then questions do need to be asked. I have certain expectations for StatsCan and the CRA that they have the necessary safeguards in place. I think that these are questions that you would have to ask StatsCan directly. People want to send this information by mail. We used to receive documents at our offices. Is it still a right that people would have to send information by mail? Well, this has to do with StatsCan and their legislation. It's less a matter of protecting private information. It's just a tool that they would prefer for sharing information. For privacy, well, the mechanism needs to be safe. If they choose to use an electronic platform, then it needs to be secure. I don't have any details regarding whether or not they banned sending in information by mail. I think I have enough time for one last question. Can your office help regarding fraud for our seniors? They might send their banking information or people ask seniors for money and then they'll send $5,000, $10,000. There's somebody from my riding who sent out thousands of dollars, $100,000, and then he had to pay taxes on money that he no longer had. You might think that he was just unlucky, but is there any way to help these people? We have tools on our website that are available to the public to protect their personal data. But it's also up to institutions. Our investigation with the CRA, for example, we have recommendations for them to protect Canadians who are sharing their information. We spoke to them about the multi-factor authentication. It needs to be simpler, especially for seniors. It can't be so complex that seniors need to have an app so they can use text messages, and we understood that it made sense because it's simple, but people need to understand that that's not the safest way. If you truly want the safest tool, then you should go through a separate application, and then people can make the choice. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Mr. Al-Saoud, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne and Mr. Chénier, for being with us today. I come at topics like these quite distinctly because the challenges we face today with regard to data privacy and data collection, I've seen develop quite literally my entire life. I've also lived through all that is artificial intelligence differently than many on this committee. I've seen its progression in an academic context, the workplace environment, and certainly socially. And it's clear that its usage is growing rapidly across the world. And there are expectations that government make use of it to better Canadians' lives through increased efficiencies. At the same time, it's important that we make sure it's used in a safe and responsible way in the public service. As you know well, Commissioner, our government launched the first public AI register, which provides information about the use of artificial intelligence across federal institutions. It goes without saying, but I will anyway, that it is a significant step toward transparency and responsible AI governance. Treasury Board is now looking to elevate the directive on automated decision-making into law through the Privacy Act. Could you speak to the importance of this directive being embedded into law and what this increased level of transparency means for Canadians?
Thank you for the question. Well, I think, and this parallels a recommendation that I have been making and that is reflected in the government's consultation. And again, I will say that there have been many exchanges between my office and Treasury Board, and I spoke to the minister. And those recommendations are largely reflected in the consultation. I've advocated for privacy impact assessments to be a legal requirement because currently it's a requirement in the Treasury Board policy and directive, the same as the algorithmic impact assessment that you're referring to is. And that's good, but it's not enough. Because when something is required by policy, we see more instances of it not being complied with because it is the consequence is less than if you break the law. So I think raising this to the level of a legal obligation makes it more transparent. It's more visible when it's in the law, and it focuses, it gives it a higher priority. So I support both the privacy impact assessment and the algorithmic impact assessments being legal requirements.
Fantastic. As a follow-up, I'm sure that you've seen we're looking to strengthen privacy notice requirements, including when automated decision systems are used. Could you speak to the importance of this and what it means for Canadians to have something like this easily accessible to them?
Well, it's important for Canadians to be able to have a better understanding of artificial intelligence and the decision-making and how it impacts them. So again, this is an area where I agree with the consultation. We need to have the ability to have explanations. Why was the decision made? What type of information is used to make the decision? Because that's not only going to protect Canadians by telling them what's going on, but it also generates trust. And I think that it's important. It's important now. It was important. I made this recommendation in the private sector 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3 years ago. And I thought it was very important in the early days of AI. But I think in a way there's still a lot of development and it's moving very quickly. So having more information, having the ability to ask, not to get the technical details, but to say this is the type of information, this is the type of decision. And so that transparency is important.
I think that Canadians are more sensitive now to this notion of trust than they ever have been before, specifically in relation to how their data is used. I'll switch on to a slightly different stream here. I'd like to get your thoughts on theme one, this notion of enabling integrated services. At times, I think Canadians view government as one single organization, and that it is, of course, not the case. It is several institutions, at times operating in silos, admittedly, and I think we'd all agree that there's significant importance in ensuring that services are connected and easy to navigate. Now, I'm still relatively new to this committee, but I understand that under the current Privacy Act, it can be difficult for federal institutions to share personal data seamlessly. I also understand that this leads to delays, duplications, and yes, at times, frustrations. As our government looks to modernize its operations, could you speak to the importance of ensuring integrated services while also ensuring privacy protections remain fundamental?
Well, it is important to have both. Government needs to be more nimble. I think there's a lot of importance to that. Canadians expect that. But we have to make sure that we're doing this with the appropriate safeguards. That if data is going to be shared, perhaps right now there's not enough ability to share it. But if you give too much ability to share it with not enough safeguards, then the risk is that I give my information to one department, say for a health reason, there wouldn't necessarily be a need for this to be used in a completely unrelated department without my knowledge or without my awareness. So I think those guardrails are important, and that's going to generate trust. And then I think Canadians are going to be happy that they don't have to send 8, 9, 10 different forms to different places. But they also don't want situations where there's a privacy breach or how come public servants in this department have nothing to do with my file. Now, there's so many people with access to my information. So it needs to be very well built. And those other measures to protect privacy and the order-making power and strengthening the privacy regime, I think is a real opportunity to show that they go hand in hand. And that's how you generate trust. And I think in the government's AI pillars for AI. The first pillar, protecting Canadians, safeguarding democracy, talks about trust, and that's how you're going to encourage AI. And to do that, you need modernized laws.
I rushed over for this conversation, but I suspect I'm out of time.
Merci. Ça l'a dépassé un petit peu.
You went over just a little bit. Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for being with us. It was very informative. We are now going to need to go over the budget.
Mais requis lorsque tous les crédits sont mis en délibération en même temps.
Is there unanimous consent for the votes? Ms. Gaudreau, you agree? Yes? Yes? Thank you.
Ça, c'est un nouveau mot pour moi.
That's a new word for me.
Merci.
La présidence devrait-elle faire un rapport à la Chambre?
Shall the chair report to the House, vote 1 under the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, vote 1 under Office of the Conflict of Interests and Ethics Commissioner, vote 1 under Office of the Senate Ethics Officer, and votes 1 and 5 under Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, less the amount granted in interim supply. Is that carried? Will we be presenting a report? You're saying yes? Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Have a good 2 weeks off.
Back and be in shape and have fun. Merci. Alors, c'est à journée.
Meeting adjourned.